Welcome to NucleCast, the official podcast of the ANWA Deterrence Center. Our host is Dr. Adam Lowther, co-founder and vice president for research at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. The ANWA Deterrence Center is a 501c3 organization ensuring a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent and its ongoing modernization. Thank you for listening and welcome to the show. The views of the host and the guests are their own.
Welcome back to another great episode of NucleCast. Of course, I'm your host, Adam Lowther, and today we have with us a great guest, Major General Jason Armagost, or as he is known, Armo. And we're going to talk about, he's the new commander of 8th Air Force, and we're going to talk about 8th Air Force and its mission and organization and what it does. And then we might even have a chance to talk a little bit about the B-21 and any other sort of important issues that Armo wants to talk about. And of course, my sidekick as always is Bob, my magic genie, who will give General Armagost his 3 wishes at the very end of the show. So keep that in mind. You'll have 3 wishes, but they got to be related to the topics we talk about. So with that long introduction, Armo, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks for being here.
We've known each other for a while now, and I've always enjoyed talking to you, and I particularly enjoy talking to you in this format, in this forum, because I've heard what you've done with others, and it's been really fascinating to follow your journey with NucleCast. So it's a real pleasure and honor to be part of that. So thank you for what you're doing on this broad topic.
Well, there's our nation has 350 million Americans, and most of them. Now, I'm not sure that's quite as true for the NucleCast audience, but for those that are not normal listeners who might not be aware of it, they don't know much about 8th Air Force. They don't necessarily know about its mission. So could you kick us off by telling us about 8th Air Force and its mission?
Well, I would offer that the history of the 8th Air Force is maybe what's incredibly fascinating and maybe most fascinating about it, because that gets us to where we are today. But, there's a fantastic book called Masters of the Air, which is about to be an Apple Plus series that we're waiting eagerly for, that really does kind of tell the story of 8th Air Force, Mighty 8th, all the way back into World War II. If it is not the most storied institution or organization in the U.S. Air Force, I would challenge anyone to find one that is more storied, not just from World War II, but from the Cold War through Desert Storm 1 and all the way through today, through the Global War on Terror, and now into a new era of competition and pure adversary competition. So I would break down for folks who are maybe not so familiar with what a numbered Air Force does. I would say, in the case of 8th Air Force, we really do 2 things, and it goes down to some very simple language in my mind, and this is how I assess myself each day and what we do. The first thing is in the spirit of the orders that we follow. It is be prepared to ... So when we say we must be prepared to do something, we have to organize, we have to train, and we have to equip our people. We have to develop our leaders and our airmen to do things that we are asked to do in the future. So it's making smart decisions about how we allocate resources, manage resources, and lead our people and develop our people so that we can best be prepared to be an on-call long-range strike force for the nation. There's about 24,000 airmen in 8th Air Force who are at various stages of their career, obviously, from airmen. In my case, I've been in for 31 years, and we have people probably on a bus from San Antonio right now to the bases in 8th Air Force. But for the most part, it is bomber aircraft, it is command and control platforms in the case of the E-4B, and it is those things that we do primarily for strategic command. And that leads me to the second simple language approach to how I say what it is we do, which is on order, ... And that on order is literally from the president, Secretary of Defense, and Joint Chiefs of Staff, down through the combatant command, STRATCOM as assigned forces in this case, to do something that we are called to do under crisis or in competition to preserve options for our country. So those really are the two kind of simple approaches: be prepared to and on order. So that's kind of how I've been in really try and simplify through language what it is we do every day.
So as you think about the forces, at your disposal that work for you, could you maybe tell the audience where those forces are, what they're comprised of?
So we are all in the Central Time Zone, which is, has some very good reasons based on physics throughout the Cold War when it comes to our ability to protect and defend ourselves and yet be able to respond to historical challenges. In the case of the Soviet Union, you had intercontinental ballistic missiles and routes of flight that would optimize our time to survive and our ability to be ready to give a follow-on response. So that's kind of a physics reason for why we're mostly all in the central and mountain time zone, I guess, to be fair. But we have, we consist, in the case of bombers, we have B-1s, B-2s, and B-52s. So the B-1s are at Dyess Air Force Base in Texas and Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota. The B-2 is at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, and B-52s are at Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, and Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. And so not only do we have that dispersal amongst the center part of the country, but we have a north-south dispersal as well, again, to provide resilience and survivability from a threat. And in that resilience and survivability, we then also have the ability to respond and posture in different ways, which is kind of historically what bombers are known for, is the ability to be very visible and transparent in what it is we're doing to deter.
Now, with the B-21 coming online in the years ahead, correct me if I'm wrong, but the purpose of the B-21, of course, is not to replace the B-52, but primarily to replace the B-1 and the B-2. And can you explain for the listeners sort of what is the thinking on the B-21 and its purpose and role, and what are the numbers, and why are we choosing and making the choices and decisions we're making?
Yeah, so that's there's a lot. There is a lot inside of that question, and I could really talk about it at length, but I could also get myself in trouble very quickly with classification. So I'll be judicious in how I do this. But really, you're correct, right? B-21 will ultimately, we're going to go to a 2-bomber force. So the B-52 is being modernized. It's going to become the B-52J. The B-1 and the B-2 will both be ultimately replaced by the B-21. And the real reasons behind the B-21, the history books at some point in the future are going to be very fascinating because of the choices we made and the opportunities we saw in what you can do with a truly penetrating force. I think history tells a good story on the B-2, and the B-2 is often really kind of pointed at as one of the systems. I would not say it is the system, but it is certainly one of the systems that really did challenge the Soviet approach to war. In fact, I just read a very good book by Andrew Krapinovich that's called The Origins of Victory, and he speaks at length about what the Soviets in the 80s termed the recce strike complex. And if you really apply the B-2 thinking and the approach to our ability to penetrate and hold targets at risk, kind of our choosing, that same kind of approach and theory applies in a newer generation of aircraft that in many ways is similar because stealth technology is electronic warfare, and the principles of electronic warfare are physics and engineering. And so some of those principles remain constant, but your ability to do things differently with newer physics and newer engineering can maintain that preeminence of the capability. But ultimately, having a penetrating force like that doesn't just rely on on exquisite weapons necessarily, and can hold at risk at the time and place of our choosing different targets is really a capability that I would say drives deterrence not just at the nuclear level, but down through the conventional level as well, to provide that optionality to escalation manage for a president to say, we may or may not choose to use a nuclear weapon, but we can certainly hold you at risk at the time and place of our choosing. So that's kind of the theoretical background and the way ahead for what remains an incredible opportunity with different approaches to physics and engineering, yet the principles still apply.
So as you think about this dramatic change in replacing the B-2 and the B-1 and bringing on the B-21 and sort of the China threat that we're facing, which is, it's essentially put the adversary, 3 times further away. And in a potential fight of distances where we're going to have to go there much further away, to me, it seems pretty clear that bombers become increasingly important, that, they'll be some of the earliest elements that'll be in a fight because it'll take the Navy a while to get there. It'll take the Army longer to get there. And so bombers will probably be one of the earliest supports the United States provides. So as we think about, and you think about these scenarios, you plan for these scenarios, as you think about potential conflict in the years ahead, how do you see 8th Air Force positioned and positioning itself to be prepared for the kinds of fights that we may face?
So I think I would break that down into a couple of ways of looking at it. You're exactly right, by the way, when it comes to the Indo-Pacific. The distances are vast. I mean, they are. So when I was a lieutenant, I flew F-16s in Misawa, and we deployed to Australia once, and then went around India, actually through Singapore over to Saudi Arabia, and just it's staggering, really, the distances we're talking about. The map doesn't even almost tell the tale. So you're exactly right about the distances and the criticality of having the right numbers of long-range strike platforms to meld with the joint force. To your points, everything has strengths and weaknesses, right? And to make that joint force have those capabilities that are additive at the time and place of our choosing, where they can come together, is really, really important. But I see it in 2 ways. I see it in competition, and I see it in crisis. And the B-21 obviously will have a role in both. Competition is underway, right? We see our adversaries making very deliberate choices when it comes to the systems, the air defense systems they're developing, the regionally powerful power projection platforms they are testing on a routine basis, whether it's hypersonics, whether it's very long-range air-to-air missiles, really inventive and integrated surface-to-air approaches and maritime approaches to that. So that is all in competition right now as we speak. And so we're going to get the force balance right in the future through the platforms that we have, which will be, again, the B-52J ultimately, and then the B-21. But then also in that mix, I would offer that command and control becomes even more important as we look at how do you have systems that confront systems. So there's a very good RAND paper, I think, from 2019 called Systems Confrontation Warfare, or Systems Confrontation and System Destruction Warfare. It's a very good unclassified report you can get that does kind of lay out the Chinese approach to the things I just mentioned and the systems they are developing to integrate together to contest new space, push us back, and make us make hard choices, just like we're going to do the same. We're going to contest that denied airspace. We're going to make choices in platforms and weapons and sensors, but we're also going to command and control differently. And I would offer that the professionalism and the history of 8th Air Force really does offer us a platform to jump off from as far as how we develop new concepts of operation to confront those systems that they're.
This episode of NucleCast is brought to you by the ANWA Deterrence Center, whose mission is to educate Americans about the nuclear enterprise and strategic deterrence. You know, it's sort of interesting that you say that, because one of the jobs I've had in the past was I used to run Air Force professional publications, and one of our publications was Air and Space Power Journal Mandarin. And I would occasionally go to China for meetings and to participate in conferences. And it was about 2013 or so, 2014 maybe. I think it was 2014. And I was in Changsha at the National University of Defense Technology, and I was presenting on some U.S. nuclear concepts. And I was approached by a PLA general, and he said, "Adam, I read your journal," and he meant the Mandarin version of ASPJ. And he said, "I think we can match your technology, but I don't think we can match the quality of your officers. You think better than we do." And I offer that example to ask you, as you talk about concept development and you talk about how you are as an organization preparing for what is a very different fight from what we have historically prepared for, and even from what we spent the last 20 years doing. How is your staff and 8th Air Force thinking through the challenges of this, the distances, the different strategic approach of the Chinese versus the Russians versus fighting a war on terrorism, all those very unique challenges that the Chinese respect us for? Yeah. How are y'all thinking about, doing that differently and approaching it?
No, I think that's a very good question, and I would like to find out where that general is now, because I suspect that from 2014 until now, he might have been one of the ones that was purged, right? So, because he sounds like a very thoughtful general, and he appreciates the value of a professional force, and it is one of the things that the Chinese force struggles with, right? Because they haven't been in a shooting war since 1979. So I think that their leadership does have a lot of questions as to their ability to take the technology that they're rapidly developing and to go towards those concepts of operation and things. So I think there's two parts to your question almost, and it's a struggle, right? We have watched now 2 administrations with a national defense strategy that has made a very distinct pivot in both cases, from the global war on terror to a different approach with these 2 peer adversaries, Russia being the acute threat and China being the long-range threat. Long-range meaning long over a time horizon. They seem to have postured themselves better to have a temporal competition with us that is maybe different than Russia's. And so it's, I think what we have evolved very quickly in 8th Air Force in particular, I would say, from it, when you were in 2014, when you were in China, we had 8th Air Force bombers on Guam in what was known at the time as continuous bomber presence. And there's geographic combatant commands are very right to want to have a certain posture in their theater to present forces in such a way that complicates the decision-making of adversaries, and it shows our commitment to our partners and allies, and shows that we are there and we're not going to vacate something, right? So now I would also offer that we've evolved from continuous bomber presence to what's now known as Bomber Task Force. And Bomber Task Force, I would argue, is helping us think through these new concepts of operation in very interesting ways. because I think we are also doing a better job, even particularly in the Indo-Pacific, with integrating with partners and allies who are very interested in furthering that integration and making us more interoperable, not just integrated, showing up in the same airspace at the same time, but interoperable in our command and control, in our strategies, in our ability to work with and understand each other at a headquarters level and on our staffs. And so that has been really fascinating to watch. And I will tell you, you're probably not going to see, it's more like a dimmer switch where we've gone from a global war on terror mindset, where bombers played a very, very powerful role in that as well. But we've shifted to a much different approach. Now, institutions are bureaucratic by nature, and there's good reasons for that. And so as the institution, I think, catches up to the thinking and the concepts of operation, we're going to see kind of quantum leaps in our approaches to things. And we're starting to see that now in how we command and control, maybe how we think about communications differently, whether it's beyond line of sight, whether it is how we move data around, how we share data, how we architect it, so that everyone who has a sensor in or near the space of interest can participate together and share an awareness, but also to have what I would call battle management decisions being made, as far as so we don't misallocate resources or effectively target things such that we make the best use of limited resources. Because again, it's back to your point of the ranges are vast, and the payload has to matter in the time and space that it occupies.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I wonder, as we sort of prepare for this new future, is there a significant amount of work you're having to do with 8th Air Force Airmen to prepare them for what is certainly, it appears at least, to be a significantly more difficult challenge than what we've seen, at least, in your career and my career? Are there major things that you're doing with airmen? New training, new education? Are you looking for different types of people? What are you doing to prepare 8th for this type of competition and conflict that we're facing now and into the future?
Well, I think we actually have an advantage maybe that some others don't, in that, to the point of your question. And because we're also a nuclear command, that nuclear command has very high standards of process, of discipline, such that we have to have a safe, secure, reliable, and credible force. And the credibility part is what I'm really talking about there. And so when you have these very high standards, obviously the airmen, as you get them into your command, or they maintain their professional development through the command, they are aware of that, and they because of that, I would offer, it presents opportunities to think differently in ways maybe that we wouldn't if we were not so closely guarded, basically closely held as far as what our foundational responsibilities are. And so I think that's a real opportunity. But to your point, I would say we look for different characteristics in people, I think, now, but regardless of whether we look for them or not, we get them. And so I'm pretty astounded at how younger airmen who come in, their approach to technology is different than certainly our generation, because they essentially grew up with it. My youngest son, who's 17 and a senior in high school, it's interesting to watch him approach technology. He sees it. It's ubiquitous to him. It's not a something that's injected into his life. Has always been part of his life, and we see that in our airmen too. And so they often have innovative and shockingly fast understanding, and can then therefore lead our understanding in these new concepts and concept development. And so that's a real opportunity we take advantage of. And General Bussier has really implemented, as did General Cotton and General Ray in my time here at Barksdale. They have all focused very much on professional development, professional education, specific to the nuclear mission. But again, I would offer that the expertise you gain in understanding that the competitive aspects of that, but then how that operates in crisis really does kind of open your mind to different possibilities about how you build a disciplined force, how you build a force that is adaptable and agile in complex environments. And so I think that is playing out. But again, we sometimes have to remind people of what it is we have to do every day through the transition. I think it's important to remind anyone who's maybe not as familiar with our mission set. We're talking about getting the B-21 and the B-52J, but all that time as that gets developed and engineered and brought to the field and made ready to be operational, there's no backing off of the requirements for the B-1 and the B-2 in that time frame. In fact, we have to operate at a very high level through that fielding. And so again, I would say that the standards that we have present opportunities that others may not have to them, because the interest and the oversight and the clear understanding of the essential nature of what it is we do is so important.
I was thinking about your response, and it sort of made me think about the very unique nature of your mission, in the sense that we have a triad, and the ICBM leg, it's the on alert force, and it's focused on one singular mission. We have the boomers, and the boomers are focused on one singular mission. Then we have a bomber force that is focused on a conventional mission most of the time and a nuclear mission some of the time. And while you have to be both, you're never not thinking about the nuclear mission, but on a day-to-day, you're oftentimes, the global war on terror was the perfect example of delivering conventional munitions with great regularity. How do you balance? Because thinking, nuclear is a different mindset than thinking the conventional mission. So how do you, and your airmen, how do you balance that sort of bipolar nature that you have to inherently have to perform both of those missions?
So I think the way I help them, or help myself as well, understand the where we are today and then where we're going in the future, the way I most find myself having kind of sparks of inspiration or imagination about how we approach that is by thinking about what the threat is doing, right? It's very, very dynamic. Russia in the last year and a half invaded a neighbor, the largest country in Europe, and has routinely, you've probably talked about this on Nuclecast, routinely kind of in hidden ways and not so hidden ways threatened the use of nuclear weapons in this conflict or around this conflict, right? And so that remains an ever-present thing. China is testing and integrating systems at a rate that is across domains, space, maritime, now nuclear with ICBMs. This is routinely happening, and it is something we watch very closely. But they're also trying to figure out how to integrate to their own new forms of command and control. And they also, we know, are going to challenge our forms of command and control. And so the way I help understand the threat, or get myself to understand the threat, and help our airmen to understand the threat, opens up their mind and their approach to, well, if that's what competition looks like, if we're being pressed on these areas, we need to be able to be agile and respond, not respond as in a kinetic response, but our ability to shift our force or shift our tactics, shift our strategies to adapt to that new contested environment. And so I think I always start with the threat, and the threat is real and it is evolving quickly. And there are characteristics we can build into our processes and our how we integrate with other joint forces, how we provide optionality across the spectrum of conventional weapons, across domains, up through nuclear, right? Because I think if competition shows us anything, it shows us that everything connects. And so, for me, it's less a matter of, if we're talking about nuclear weapons, that means everything else is also still on the table. Because I think if I were the president, I would want to see a range of options in response to whatever the vignette is, right? And so, understanding that competition, understanding how we're being pressured on different areas, I think opens up new thinking about how we can connect across domains and think about, what could cyber do here? What can space do here? And how do we learn together such that when it all comes down to the decision-making power of the national command, then they have options that are credible and reliable and have been practiced, so that it's not something that is discovery learning in times of crisis.
Now we're at that time in the show where I like to bring out Bob. Now, Bob is my magic genie, and if I rub my lamp, I found this in the desert in my time there, and Bob's been a good friend over the years, and he's granted me my 3 wishes. Only got 3, but he's now giving you 3 wishes about 8th Air Force. Any wishes you want regarding 8th Air Force? So with that, what's your first wish for Bob?
So I would love to be able to ubiquitously communicate what it is we do, because so here's a good example. And when I say ubiquitously, I think anywhere you go in the military, whoever you talk to, they're going to be able to talk at length about their expertise of what it is they do. And we have airmen in 8th Air Force who could do that at length. But that's the beauty of having had a couple of joint jobs and having recently come from a joint job. It's really interesting to learn about the capabilities and the approaches and the mindsets of others. And so I think people kind of inherently understand the power of bombers. They're an awesome force. They have been kind of historically proven to potentially be a difference-making force. They will in any large-scale competition or large-scale conventional fight, they generally end up being the ones who drop the predominance of the weapon tonnage, things like that. And so there's kind of this inherent awe to them. But to be able to ubiquitously communicate what it is we do and how we do it, again, I think shows others, particularly inside the DoD, so across the services, the opportunities that exist to jointly work together in that way. So that's kind of a wish to say that I would like other people to understand what it is we do in deeper ways, because as we think about the future, a lot is classified, but all of the things that are classified kind of operate from first principles. And so we can talk about a lot of that stuff without even getting classified. It's kind of like your point about range. We've got to be able to get there. And if you don't have exquisite weapons that can fly a long way, then you've got to be able to get close enough and survive to hold at risk targets such that you're credible enough that you are a deterrent force. That's the other side of this coin, right? If we can communicate that effectively enough by demonstrating that we can do these things and integrate and exercise in ways that are useful, then that PLA general who is either retired or maybe even further along in his career can remain impressed with the professionalism of our joint force. That was a pretty easy wish.
Okay, so that's a pretty good wish. How about wish number 2?
Okay, I would say, I don't think you would ever hear a military leader who has to make resourcing decisions not ask for the ability to make better resourcing decisions, right? I see opportunities that sometimes we're not able to capitalize on because of capital, right? And so it's a competition inside and across the services for those resources to make what I would call certainly operational level moves, but I would also argue that in the case of bombers, if you make a few key decisions for resourcing, then you can make some big strategic moves as well. And I would offer that's kind of what Secretary Kendall did starting just a little less than 2 years ago with the operational imperatives. I don't know if you've talked about that on Nucleacast at all, but I think that's what Secretary Kendall was trying to do. Yeah, he said, okay, here's a line in the sand. We are now confronting a different type of adversary. And the competition is out of the gates now, and we're going to think differently about how to approach those things. And so he had operational imperatives. He said, these are things we must do, and here's how we're going to figure out how to do it. And he paired operational leads and acquisition leads together. And we spent a year, really, and more than a year now, but we spent a year, and this was in my previous job, really thinking hard about how do we make the B-21 a strategic difference maker going forward. There were other categories as well, but in our case, for long-range strike, it was B-21 family of systems. And really the big thing is, so what I'm saying for my wish is what we really uncovered in that, and this is kind of first principles, right? What matters when you're talking about strategic game-changing platforms is not just the platform itself, but it's like the question you asked about developing the airmen. It's the platform, it's the airmen, it's the weapons, it's the sensors, and it's the communications and command and control. And so those things together, and not bought in isolation, not thought about in isolation. Oh, by the way, we need a radio. Oh, by the way, we need to be able to talk over the horizon. Oh, by the way, we ought to have sensors with different capabilities so that we can have what I would call a local kill chain, or we can share information with other platforms and systems that are in our vicinity such that we can cooperatively target. It's all things like, if you read some of the even open source, what China is doing with their systems, it's similar thinking, actually. And so that's why I said I would start with the threat, but then, really help the institutions make good, smart choices as we compete going forward.
Okay. Final wish.
Okay. Final wish. So along with that, but it's very different actually. Because I was commissioned in 1992. So that after Desert Storm, right? And so, and about 6 months after the Soviet Union fell in December 91. And so the world that I grew up in, and now having served for 31 years, whether I like it or not, I developed habits. I developed ways of thinking about things. I developed choices that I have inherently made but have not recognized, that have resulted in thinking about problems in certain ways. Probably the thing that I would wish was that I could categorically overcome those for the people who follow me, because I worry that we raised a generation who's a little bit younger than me, say 15 to 20 years, so field grade officer types in the Air Force, who were not just commissioned after those things happened, but literally that's all they've seen in their professional lives when it comes to global war on terror and the responses to 9/11 and categorical dominance of the air, which is not the case when we talk about peer adversaries. And so I think I would wish for some kind of an intellectual and spiritual break from those days, such that my confidence is raised that those field graders literally see the world differently than they were raised to.
Yeah, that makes sense. That is a challenge when, you have no real Cold War experience. You've focused on, terrorism as a tactic of the weak. And so you've never really seen a peer adversary. So it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, Jason, we're at the end of the show. Thanks for coming on Nucleacast, and thanks for sharing your thoughts about 8th Air Force.
No, I appreciate Adam, and I appreciate what it is you're doing with this program, but I also appreciate how you think deeply and broadly about the challenges we face in not only the nuclear enterprise, but the national security enterprise writ large. You have a strong and interesting voice that I see often when it comes to opinion pieces and things like that. So I appreciate what it is you're doing to help us, break that chain of thought.
Well, I guess I try too. And thanks to you, the listeners, for joining us on this episode. Yeah. And well, hopefully you, the listeners, will join us on the next episode of NucleCast.
This has been a production of the ANWA Deterrence Center, a 501c3 that seeks to educate key decision makers, stakeholders, and the public to ensure a broader understanding of the nation's strategic nuclear deterrent. Our executive producer is Kimberly Charrington, and this episode has been engineered and mixed by David Krunkel. Help us grow our followers by sharing it and follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter at NucleCast.